Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Anatolian Dispatch, part of the Ahval News group of podcasts. Ahval News is your best source of information on Turkey, on all things about Turkey. Today we have with us Bruce Mabley, retired from the Canadian Foreign Service. Bruce was the political counselor for the Canadian Embassy in Ankara, Turkey from 2010 to 2014. He then returned to Ottawa for his final posting and then retired from the Canadian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2015. Since that time, he has written and he's formed a group of commentators on international affairs. It's called the Mackenzie Papineau Group, and you can find it by just doing a little Google searching. The group and Bruce in particular write on a number of international issues. Most of them have a focus on Canada, but also on the Middle East and Turkey included. So if you want to look for some of Bruce's writings, you can check him out. He's had a number of things published in far too many journals to mention. So I'll just mention two, the Australian International Affairs and Eurasia Review, which has a large number of his articles, and I would strongly encourage you to explore them. So with that, Bruce, I'm going to ask you to start with just kind of a general overview of Turkish-Canadian relations in, say, the last 4 or 5 years and how they're going on currently. But before you do, I just want to remind people, sometimes they see Canada as only in the shadow of the United States. And, you know, in some ways that's true, given the size and populations of the countries. But Canada is a member of the G7 of the world's most industrialized, wealthy nations. And it is also a top 10 economy around the world. And that is something that Turkey might want to keep in mind since Canada is has less than half the population of Turkey, but it has an economy which is a good bit larger. So with that, I'll ask Bruce to talk a little bit about Turkish-Canadian relations. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, Canadian Turkish relations in the last 5 years, I would put it at around 7. There are no major conflicts between the two countries. There are economic exchanges, companies buy other companies. There's a lot of economic activity between Turkey and Canada. The friction, certainly Canada is historically was a country that was founded by two European civilization, Christian civilizations, and that has affected how Canada has reacted, and the Canadian people in general. I'm not just talking about Canadian political elites, but also the fact that Canada was founded by France and Great Britain have obviously made an impact on the country. Obviously, like many modern democracies, secularism has taken hold, but one area of friction, possible friction, between Turkey and Canada over the past 5 years is the soft Islamization moves that have been underway by President Erdogan, and this has not escaped the view of the Canadian political elites, and certainly not escaped the scrutiny of the Armenian lobby, which in Canada is extremely strong. They're very, very closely linked to parliamentary groups. They have a lot of senators and MPs that support them. So every time There's the issue, for example, of the announcement of the genocide, the declaration of the genocide. It's an issue now. It's an issue every year when it comes up, because although it's not a binding motion, it definitely it sets the tone for relations between Turkey and Canada, and creates what I would consider an unnecessary friction between the two countries. So, and this has affected the way Canada looks, for example, at the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The Armenian lobby has put a lot of pressure on Canada, and that pressure, especially on a minority government, because that's the one we have now, a minority government, a government that depends on other parties for its political life. Obviously, in a minority situation, they're much more attentive to what lobby groups have to say, and the Armenian lobby has made the point that that the Armenians have been the slighted party in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and in the meantime, Canada has sold drones to Turkey, which according to most observers, have been used in the latest conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. So this presents a certain level of friction. It certainly doesn't penetrate deeply into the tissue of relations, but it definitely, especially for a government in a minority situation, it's important to please the Armenian lobby, and at the same time avoid being seen to be taking sides in the, for example, in the Nagorno-Karabakh situation. The other point, and this is something that when I was in post in Anchor, I would come back to the country, to Canada, and I was wondering, as I'm sure some of your listeners are, what do the people, and I'm talking about diplomats or political elites, I'm talking about the people, what do they think about Turkey? And the observation that always comes back is many people have visited Turkey. Many people have spent time in Turkey. And I guess this is the biggest pro-Turkish element that exists in our relations. If you dig down a little bit, tourism has played a very important role, because a lot of Canadians have visited Turkey and they love Turkey. I haven't heard one, I mean, this is anecdotal, but I think it's important. It's like me taking a taxi ride in Istanbul. I get a chance to ask a lot of questions, and I get the popular view of what's going on. So, you know, Canadians, they love the country. They love and to be honest, as a diplomat, I've been in many different postings, and Turkey was my favorite. It was certainly the place where I was welcomed with open arms and so on. Although I wouldn't want to be a Kurdish diplomat, but you know, the white face and the European French talk helps, but certainly I felt the time spent in Turkey was time well spent.
Go ahead.
The last point it relates to the Gülen movement here in Canada, which is alive and well, and I was invited by my language teacher to visit the Centre Block in the House of Commons here in Canada. I don't think I'd ever get an invitation to go there otherwise. And it was an incredible showcase. It was in 2010, an incredible showcase. All the political parties were there, including even the separatist party of Quebec was there. Everyone was there. They had the fire chief, they had the police chief, they had everyone who counted in the Ottawa, and of course, it was full of Turkish businessmen who were doing business in Canada. It was, I guess, you know, in the United States, you probably have something like that. I don't know, on Memorial Day or whatever, but it was incredible. And I thought to myself, if I were the Turkish ambassador in Ottawa, and I had these guys to support me, the Armenian lobby has no way of even approaching something like this. This was really professionally, and then there were the videos of Fethullah Gülen and Bill Clinton and all the rest of it. But every religious denomination was there. I mean, they made sure everyone was there. So when of course the coup occurred, and I mean, you could see that the Gülen movement in Turkey was under pressure. Their schools were under pressure. I mean, it removes a lever of influence that is incredibly important for countries like Canada. Just incredibly important. Now the Turkish embassy basically has lost all of that incredible prestige. I was really surprised as a language student. All of a sudden, I saw this, and it was my first. Entry, or my first experience of the Gülen movement in Canada. Later, we went to the embassy, and there was the language teacher was picking out which ones were Gülenist and which ones were not. A divided house, you say, yeah, a divided house. But how much leverage they accumulated through that movement, and now the embassy and the Gülenists are enemies, and a lot of that leverage is gone. So
yeah, I want to return to that, but because there's interesting parallels about how much pro-Turkish lobbying power was lost. Effectively, what you're saying is, by, you know, regardless of the involvement of anybody from the Gülen movement in the coup attempt, and I believe there were many of them who were involved in the coup attempt, the way the government went after people post-coup, regardless of how much or how little attachment they had to the Gülen movement, struck many people as over the top, not respecting the rule of law, not respecting, you know, and everybody understood, yes, it was traumatic, but you don't throw out the entire legal code in order to hunt down a handful of people. And because most of the perpetrators were right there in Turkey, and they were wrapped up pretty quickly. But the same thing kind of happened in the United States, and it would be interesting to speculate, what would it be like now for President Erdogan and others dealing with the Biden administration if those well-connected Gülenists in the United States were in there on Capitol Hill, White House. And the same thing in Canada. They were in Parliament, they were in the ministers' private chambers saying, hey, you know, ease up on Turkey. But I want to explore that point you made, which I think in some ways it's like the soft power of tourism. And one of the things we did, we always looked at the opening pattern of Turkish Airlines, where they were opening. So one of the things you saw is part of it was that you had Turkish business people getting out there, and you also had Gülenist using Turkish Airlines to get out there and to push their particular vision of Islam, which by the way, for many Westerners was a far less nervousness causing form of Islam. You know, so that's one of the ways. I mean, the Gülen movement played on that, on the fears of Islamization and of militant Islam, and to portray themselves as a gentler, more tolerant, understanding, and as you say, you know, interreligious and ecumenical, you know, Islam. So, but that soft power of tourism, you know, I think you're right. It's not just Canadians, but it's hard to find people who visit Turkey as a tourist and come back with bad feelings towards Turkey and the Turkish people. Which brings us to this. How well are people in both your parliament and then in the United States Congress in making this distinction of the political leadership of Turkey and the Turkish people themselves? You know, I think one of the things that I find I think it's most difficult for people to understand is that, you know, just as not every American voted for Trump, and not every American voted for Joe Biden, not every Turk voted for Tayyip Erdogan.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit, that distinction between the two.
Definitely. The you know, the Gülen movement is, and many of the Gülenists, their Islamic origins, the sources of their religion are Sufi, and not Gulf style aesthetic, very dry. You know, read the text. Arabic is a fine language. All you need to know is Arabic, and you'll understand the Quran. And whereas the Gülenists are their origins are much more involved with Mevlana and the Sufis, and that puts a different face completely on religion, and it certainly caters to an image that a lot of liberals here in Canada want to depict of Islam. And okay, Islam is because for what it's worth, and I have my own problems with this, Canada is the present government takes a lot of does a lot of effort to try and I mean, I look at it a bit like Tammany Hall.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Canadian Tammany Hall.
Wait, just a minute. For our viewers or listeners who don't understand the reference to Tammany Hall was the spoils system operated by a mayor in New York to maintain himself in power. And the way he did it was to give out spoils or gifts, presents, oversight of different departments in the government of New York City. And it was, you know, if you were Irish American or Italian American or Lithuanian American or et cetera, it was all jockeying and making sure everybody was taken care of, because everyone then came out and kept you in power. So there you go. Sorry.
Well, I mean, that's a good image for the liberal government that we have in power at the present time, although with a lot of modern touches and so on. But nonetheless, to get back to the Gülen image of Islam, it certainly is the image that in Ottawa liberals like to, and by liberals I mean big L liberals, not just L, small L liberals. They like to say that yes, this is Islam. There's absolutely no problem with it, and yet, as you'll see, in my opening statement, the fact is that Canada is a Christian country. You can't change that. Well, you can't change that underlying fact. So when Erdogan proceeds to implement measures and take, for example, take a hard line on Israel, though I agree with him, but it certainly in the Canadian people, this kind of, well, there he goes again. It's a different kind of Islam, whereas Gülen, his image is much more palatable politically for the Canadian people as a whole and for the Canadian political elite. We just had yesterday or the day before a tragedy with 4 Muslim people in a family who were standing in the street and they were run over by. So this, builds and builds, and so pro-Islamic measures are although they're not going to change irrevocably relations between Canada and Turkey. People, for example, those same tourists that 7 years ago talked to me about how wonderful it is in Turkey are now asking the question, is it safe to go to Turkey? So the questions have changed, and so have the general perceptions. As for the government, they're quite happy to have. I mean, they would have preferred to have had a Gülen type image for Islam, and that would fit in well with their quote unquote Tammany Hall style way of governing. Just a week ago, the Prime Minister apologized to the Italian Canadians because during the Second World War, the Italian Canadians were interned. Some of them were interned, and whatever. Well, the election is coming because we gotta make sure the Italians, just like the Irish and just like the Muslims and just like the Hindus, they're all on our side, which isn't too difficult because the Conservative Party is so inept at having anything other than a stultified discourse. But to go back to Turkey and Canada, Erdogan is certainly, the image of Erdogan is not helpful, and not helpful to the government, and not helpful to the views that circulate amongst the media and amongst. I think it's important, very important, that we have journalists inside Turkey that are doing their job and continuing to criticize the government, because this seeps through as well. This trickles back into countries like Canada, and I think most people believe that Turkey is a democracy, and that although the head of state is perhaps not practicing it as we would like, but to get back to your point about parliamentarians, I think parliamentarians, I think you made a good point that parliamentarians, just like Congress people, congressmen and congresswomen, to what extent are they able to distinguish between, Erdogan and the AK party and the average Turkish family and what they have to go through. And obviously the tourists, they don't go to the east of Turkey. They mainly hang around Istanbul, down through Antalya. They may make it to Ankara, not many. But so they have the view, which is favorable for Turkey, that the western part of Turkey is, for all intents and purposes, just like Europe. It's in any kind of modern European city, Istanbul. So there's a lot of freedom. The tourists don't get the image that somehow there's something afoot to try and impose Islam on those who don't want it, or those who want us to lead a secular life.
Do you think on the kind of Christian roots of Canada? I don't know. There was a book a couple years ago came out. Tom Holland, a British historian. It's called Dominion, and it basically covers the concept that Western European history over time became dominated by Christian ethics, Christian values. At one point, it was considered to be called Christendom, and that foundation, even though most Western European and North American countries have become very much secularized, that kind of creates almost an impossibility for not having tension between Turkey and Canada, because Canada is fundamentally still within that milieu of Christianity, of values and ethics, whereas Turkey is increasingly within a non-secular milieu, because it's basically in some ways turning its back on the laïcité and is going more and more for kind of a revitalized Islam. I mean, is that, how strong a component is that of the tension between the two countries at times, the friction?
Well, I'll give you I mean, in Canada, there are different views. There are different degrees of opposition with respect to what you just mentioned. And it's based on the difference between French and English. The Anglo-Canadians are much like the British in their views with respect to Turkey. And if you place it back in the European Union context, the British were more or less willing to allow the Turks in. And they were one of the states that was in favor. And the Anglo-Canadians are, I think they follow that point of view as well. So they're certainly, but when you look at the French province of Quebec, and there are secular issues that are ongoing at the present moment, the province wants to become more, they tend to follow the French. So in a sense, they haven't lost their roots, so they haven't evolved at all. Right. They've just simply gone back to the mother country and just simply copied what their attitude is with respect to Turkey. And of course, as you mentioned, pulling it further and further away from this notion of secularism, or even from the English-Canadian perspective, pushing it away from some sort of Christian fair play attitude. This is causing tension. But I remember there was a Turkish journalist who came to Canada, and he confided to me. He said, Canada is like a tree. When you have a tree in Turkey, wind is blowing through the leaves, and the leaves are rustling, and there are all sorts of things happening. But here in Canada, there is no wind. Nothing is happening here. And I said, but where have you been in this country? Where have you visited? Have you gone to Montreal? Have you been to Quebec? No, but I don't speak French. So I said, the political hub of Canada, and the English Canadians don't like me saying this, but the fact of the matter is it's Montreal and Toronto, and Montreal is the kind of ideas place where people, even English Canada, I mean, the great literary figures in Canada, they come from Montreal. More of the politicians, even the Anglo politicians, come from Montreal, from the island of Montreal. This is, so, he didn't hear anything blowing in the wind because his ears were not attuned or were not ready to hear what wind was blowing. So there is a lot of regionalization, and this regionalization is a good example in the case of Turkey, affects views of different regions of Canada. Will take different views on issues like Nagorno-Karabakh, or on issues like soft Islamization measures in Turkey. Has Turkey become an Islamic state or whatever? So there is a regional aspect to this, because don't forget, there's a minority government here. They're not going to make any they're not going to make any important steps for fear that it'll come back and bite them.
Mm. I think that's an important point about the difference between Anglo-Canadians and Franco-Canadians, and how it colors their perception of other places, including Turkey. It's a fascinating point about the English desire for Turkey to get into the EU, and that goes back a couple of decades now. And I think in part it was due to a realization, I think, because the thing was it was across political parties in the UK that the Labour Party, the Tories, the different nationalist parties, the Scots, the DUP up in the Northern Ireland, and all this, they all basically liked the idea of getting another very populist nation on the fringe of the European peninsula, just as Great Britain is just off the coast of the European peninsula, to get them in. And I think it's worth noting, I gotta get some retired British diplomats in on this, because as far as I can see, Britain, since Brexit, is actively pursuing closer ties with Turkey, which France is decidedly not doing. I think we could agree. Now, there's a little bumping of ships in the Eastern Mediterranean,
right?
But I think, regardless, if that had never happened, if there had never been this issue about the French frigate and the Turkish destroyer and all that, if none of that had happened, I don't think that Macron is as sympathetic towards Turkey as Boris Johnson is.
No, you're right. I agree.
And I think for different reasons, Prime Minister Trudeau is more sympathetic to Turkey than Joe Biden is. And it has something to do, I think you're saying, with the fact that Trudeau I don't know. He's kind of working against type because it's the Franco-Canadians who are less sympathetic to the Turks. But you know, the point you made about Montreal, it's kind of, you know, it does have kind of a Turkish parallel. You know, you and I spent years in Ankara, which meant that we were not in the most important city of Turkey.
Right.
And in some ways that would be like being in Toronto. You know, as much as a financial hub it is, and it is in fact a financial hub. I actually have a checking account at a bank called Toronto Dominion, although we call it TD Bank in the US. But it's Toronto Dominion. You know, it's just they had to change the name a little bit, otherwise nobody in the United States would have banked with them. What do you mean? But you know, Montreal, I've spent some time in Montreal. First of all, I would tell any Turk, you know, go to Montreal. As soon as they figure out you're not another Canadian, they will speak to you in English, because they all speak English. They just don't like to speak English with other Canadians, which is understandable. Okay, fine. But, you know, where are the air links, though? Because much of what we talked about is the importance of soft power. It's the importance of people-to-people relationships. So where does that Turkish Airlines fly into? Is it Istanbul, Toronto, or Istanbul, Montreal?
Yeah. Well, as I recall, Montreal was one of the stops. The plane went to Montreal and then went on to Toronto to deposit their other passengers. But I mean, Quebecers love to travel, and a lot of them, and I discovered this, a lot of them go to Turkey, and it's one of their, but like I said, people now are asking, they ask me, I mean, I consider the question a bit insipid, but they ask me, well, oh, is it, and where, my question is, where is this coming from? This kind of fear of, and you know, the media, they like to whip things up and to project Turkey as some sort of Islamic gradually increasing Islamization, and you know, but I think they're getting a bad press in that sense. But of course, Erdogan doesn't help things much.
No, I mean, I think, again, this is, you know, it's no surprise, I think, that people in the press, whether it's Canada, the US, Great Britain, elsewhere, people in the press tend to focus on political leadership. Even though I imagine that most of them, when they got a smattering of history in university, they were told to stay away from the big man interpretation of history, the great man interpretation of history, which has been, you know, kind of reduced in importance. But that's what they do. I mean, and now it's easy to understand why news agencies do that. So, you know, you go on to, and I'm sure this happens in Canada just as in the United States. What do you see in the nightly news if you see anything on Turkey? What do you see in the newspapers if you see anything on Turkey? It's always some sort of disaster. If it bleeds, it leads. You know, there was a mining disaster and the government's at fault. There was an earthquake and people and buildings collapsed and the government's at fault. And in some cases, it might be true that the government's at fault because it didn't do what it was supposed to do. But it also is true that, you know, some really good news stories don't get told. I mean, a couple of days ago, I'm reading about this so-called sea snot in the Sea of Marmara. Okay, and this has to do with what it's called an algae bloom. Now, when you write the story, think about this. When you write the story about this proliferation of algae on a waterway or on a sea or a lake, you can just call it an algae bloom, right? And it does have something to do with the temperature, and maybe it is related to climate change, who knows, but all that, but you could just call it an algae bloom. Think about the image connected to those two words. Or you can call it a sea snot. So some writer at some paper, probably the Associated Press, came up with sea snot instead of algae bloom. And again, it goes back to this. This is, there's one of these pundits inside the Beltway in the United States who said, all the NATO members should get together and expel Turkey. Well, there's two reasons why that's never going to happen. One, the NATO members don't focus on one individual in a country to determine whether that country should remain within NATO or not. And this writer obviously has a burr under his saddle about Erdogan. But what he's doing is he's conflating Erdogan with Turkey as if they were the same thing. The other reason it would never happen is try to get consensus in NATO for any major issue.
But this issue, these issues, these kinds of statements, and we got to get rid of Erdogan. So, I mean, when you think back, I think back to again the Gülen movement in Canada. This was a valuable lever for Turkish foreign policy.
Yep.
And whenever things got a bit fiery, or a lot of these Islamization measures would have passed without any problem at all. Massaged by the Gülen people, who are in like Flint with so many of the Canadian parliamentarians and and people who count here. But and all of a sudden, this invaluable ally of the Turkish embassy in Ottawa is gone. It's gone.
Right.
All of the mobilization, all of the popular mobilization, getting people out. I mean, I was astounded that this movement. I mean, it was like there were little girls with the. It was almost like a football game, Army Navy or something. Little girls at the door giving out. I mean, it was. La pièce de la résistance. It was incredible, and it was all encompassing. No one was left out. Right. And they rented part of the Canadian Parliament. And it was incredible. But I mean, when you have problems like this, like when you have the drone problem, the Canada allowed these permits for the drones. These kinds of things could have been solved diplomatically behind the scenes, and using influence and massaging things. But it's gone. All you have now is the Turkish embassy severed from. They don't even have social events or film events, or their whole social animus is gone. Right. And I can understand that as far as the coup is concerned, well, they did well to get rid of them, but I knew the Gülenists inside Turkey, and these people are the intellectual elite, the educated people of Turkey, and all of a sudden the Turkish state has decided, well, we're getting rid of these people, the bureaucrats, the doctors, the lawyers, the I mean, what a loss! What a loss for the Turkish state. It's a social loss. These are the educated people. Now, one time I was with them, and I mean, they had their very negative side as well. I was sitting in one of their cars, and they looked over. There was a car that was stopped at a stoplight, and then they were talking amongst themselves and saying they were Kurds, or they were, you know, and you know the Kurdish language. They speak with, you know, a nasal voice like the French. My wife is French. Why are you saying things like that? I mean, they were deliberately, you know, piling on, you know, and just simply oblivious to the fact that, well, you've got a Canadian diplomat seated next to you, and his wife is French, and now you're you know, you're insulting. I mean, and they were saying the Kurdish language has this nasal. So they had their problems.
Yeah, well, you know, as I said earlier, and I think it's, you know, if you looked at who were rounded up and rightly convicted of involvement in the coup attempt, there certainly were, in addition to the military personnel and some people from other organs of government, there were people from the Gülen movement. Now, how high it went is still a subject of great debate and argument. I would even say it's reached the level of quarreling among some people. But and whether we'll ever resolve that, I don't know. We're coming up on the 5th year anniversary of the coup attempt, so that will be another point of discussion. Bruce, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay.
This is fascinating. And I want to thank you, because I think it really is, it really, you know, a lot of people don't understand that Canadian diplomats, you know, this notion that they're in the, you guys have actually the ability to get out and about and find out what's going on in a country in many ways much better than we Americans ever had. In part because our government had become so safety conscious, you know, so the restrictions on my movements in Turkey were just the most incredibly frustrating thing I had when I was there. But you know, this overabundance of caution, this what I call safety-ism that we now have, and I'm actually glad to no longer be part of it. So the next time I go to Turkey, which I hope will be soon, I'll be able to get around much more of the country than I was allowed previously. Anyway, again, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoy this, and let us know. Give us a review wherever you get your get your podcast. Bruce, take care. Don't go away.
Okay.